Whether you're a teacher or a student, chances are you don't like tests. As faculty, we hate tests because they're hard to write, they're hard to keep fair, they're hard to grade, and quite frankly, they don't usually capture what we're looking for anyway. What we want as teachers, at least personally, is to make sure that my students have learned how to analyze and apply what I have taught them. And tests don't really do that. They get to more remember, understand, and maybe a little application. And that's not what I want. I want to make sure you're ready for the profession. And testing only partially gets to it. When you're a student, you probably hate tests because number one, they're stressful. Number two, they're hard. Number three, they make you go back and study all that stuff that in some cases you'd hope to forget. And number four, because they just don't seem to capture what you've really learned about the class. Whether you're faculty or student, however, testing's here to stay. It's an important part of our educational process, primarily because we don't have any better options. So we do the best we can with what we have. From a faculty perspective, that means writing tests that are as good as I can possibly make them, that not only capture what you've learned, but also show me that you know how to use what you've learned. As a student, it means learning how to study and prepare for the tests so that you can reduce the stress and feel better about showing the faculty what you really learned. And that's what this second video in our series is about, is how do I get ready for tests so that I can be successful. Let's start by just reviewing Bloom's taxonomy briefly. Hopefully you remember these different levels, either from the discussion we had in our last segment, or because you've already seen it before. But remember that each level builds on the previous level and becomes harder for our brain to do, but also cements in place earlier levels. So as I try to understand concepts, I'm forced to remember them better. As I apply concepts, I have to understand how they work and remember all the details. So as I move up this ladder, I'm working harder, I'm remembering better, and I'm using the information more effectively. And the good news is that as I move up this ladder, I also cement in my brain the importance of concepts and keep my brain from forgetting about them. And that's perhaps the most important tool of all as we get ready for a test. So how do we do that? How do we move ourselves up Bloom's taxonomy to really remember and understand the concepts that we've learned so that we can ace that test? Well, the first thing is to do what we talked about in our last segment, and that is to review, revise, and then repeat that process. You see, the best way to remember something is to convince your brain that it's important to you, and that means thinking about it on a pretty regular basis. Best recommendation, every couple of days you want to review important facts and ideas for yourself so that your brain remembers them. How? Well, hopefully you start with a good set of notes that has key points that you've highlighted, etc. But also, you can do it by simply zipping through an online video on double speed. You can do it by going over the textbook and looking for key ideas. You can do it by skimming through whole pages of notes and then writing out or highlighting things that maybe you're starting to forget. There's a lot of ways to go back through your notes and convince your brain that it's important. If you're lucky, your professor will have multiple opportunities for you to do this built into the class. Homework assignments, quizzes, discussion topics, tests, projects, etc. The more you have to think about what you've learned, the more levels you cue in of Bloom's taxonomy, and the easier it will be for your brain to recall them at the time of a test. The next step is to talk about what you've learned. What you should do is verbally explain the important concepts and ideas in your class. Now, I share this idea with my students every semester, and every semester they push back. Why should I do this? It seems repetitive. I can just review my notes, can't I? The answer is no, because reviewing your notes, while it's important and captures a lot of the different pieces, if you do it right, it doesn't hit that very highest level. And that's where explaining something out loud becomes the most powerful tool we've got, is because it pushes you into creation. And let's face it, the best way to show that you know something is to teach it to someone else. And the good news is that someone else doesn't even have to be in the room. You can do this with anybody or anything. For example, your grandma probably just loves to hear your voice. You could call grandma and talk to her about anything you wanted, and she would listen. So call grandma and explain to her the concepts. If you don't want to talk to grandma or can't for whatever reason, tell your baby Groot statue, or talk to your posters on your wall, or stand in front of a mirror, or talk to your pillow. Personally, my steering wheel knows a lot of accounting because I tend to talk through new concepts as I drive, and that's how I cement them in my mind. Is this easy to do? No, it pushes you. That's why it's the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy. It's hard. But if you'll do it, you'll learn two important things. First, you'll cement in your memory those concepts and ideas that you already know. And second, you will very clearly highlight for yourself the things that you don't understand. And you'll know where you need to go back and study again. And that brings us to our third idea. That is to go back and try problems, examples, rhetorical questions, etc. one more time. Do them without any notes at all, and then go back and look at your answers with your notes and see how you did. Remember, trying a problem or answering a question and then looking to see if you have done it right kicks you up into evaluate. And then if you've done it wrong, you have to analyze and apply to figure out how to fix it so you do it right in the future. These last two ideas are actually the two best ways to study for any test ever because they cue in the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy. That brings us to our next step, and that is focusing our study time on problem areas. Now this seems really obvious, except for the fact that our brain doesn't like this option. You see, our brains are lazy, just like the rest of us. They don't want to work hard. And so when we study, we tend to focus on areas that we already are comfortable with because we're already comfortable with them, and the brain doesn't have to work. And so the brain kind of shifts us towards these easier areas. So one of the benefits of these two steps, creating our own explanations and trying problems again and looking to see what we've done wrong, is it tells us what we don't know. And then we can make a list and go back and study those areas. And we force our brains away from their natural inclination to go back to easier stuff and into studying what you really need to study to be comfortable for the exam. If I had $1 for every time a student came in and told me, I just didn't study for that problem, I focused on this thing instead, I was sure that's what was going to be on the test, I could probably retire. I've had that many students come by and tell me that story. And chances are you felt that way too. This is our brain naturally guiding us into areas where it feels pretty comfortable and helping us to focus there so that it doesn't have to work as hard. It's subconscious. So coming up with a list of problem areas and then focusing there, is it uncomfortable? Yeah, it can be. Is it harder? Yep. But will it get us better ready for our exams? You betcha. The last thing we're going to recommend for preparing for a test is to create a note card. Now, some of you are going to push back and say, well, my professor doesn't allow notes. I know. But what do you put on your note card? Probably the things that are hardest for you, the things that you don't remember anyway. So writing those down again gives you one last chance to review, consider, and then act on the hardest concepts for you in the material on the test. And then if your professor lets you use the card, you're ready to go. If not, you have a last set of key ideas you can look at right before the test starts so that you're ready to work on those hardest topics for you. Now, I've spent a lot of years talking with students about how to improve their test scores. And these are the ideas that I share with them. And the ones who do these things see marked improvements in their scores. The ones who don't tend to see their scores stay about the same. And if you're already an A student, well, then that's all that matters. You're still getting A's, so I guess you don't have to worry about it. What you're doing is working. But if your score on your last test wasn't exactly what you wanted, then this set of ideas will really help. In our next segment, we're going to talk a little bit about how to adapt these ideas and your normal test-taking techniques to succeed in a multiple choice test. Because let's face it, for most of us, that's the hardest test of all. Cool things coming up. We'll see you then. Thanks.